You ever watch someone destroy their own life in slow motion? Not on TV, not in a movie, but right there in front of you, in a place where truth is supposed to matter. Because that's exactly what I witnessed the day my ex-wife, Jessica, walked into our divorce hearing. Pregnant. At first, I didn't even react. I just sat there, staring across the courtroom, trying not to laugh. Not because I thought the kid was mine. I knew it wasn't. I laughed because I could see the story forming in her head like a scene out of a bad soap opera. It wasn't a coincidence. It was choreography. Every step, every sigh, every delicate touch to her stomach had been rehearsed. That's the thing about Jessica. She never really loved truth. She loved narratives. And today, she was about to perform her biggest one yet. The courtroom was cold that morning, in that sterile government building kind of way. The air conditioner hummed louder than the people. Across the room, lawyers shuffled papers and whispered to clients, their words blending into a low static. And there she was, Jessica, dressed in soft beige, a hand resting gently over the swell of her belly. It was the perfect picture of vulnerability. For a moment, even I could feel the eyes shifting toward her. A pregnant woman, alone, facing a man in a navy suit with no remorse in his eyes. You could almost hear the unspoken judgment. How could he? That's the power of optics. The modern courtroom isn't just about law. It's about emotion. Social psychologists have written about it for decades. When a woman appears visibly pregnant or distressed, empathy spikes. Jurors, judges, even clerks are human. They respond to vulnerability. Jessica knew that. She always did. But empathy, when weaponized, becomes manipulation. As I sat there watching her, I thought back to how we got here. Months of chaos, delays, filings that went nowhere. Every time progress seemed possible, she'd find a way to stall it. Feigned illnesses, misplaced paperwork, last-minute attorney switches, all to buy time, all to exhaust me. And now, this, the grand finale, the pregnancy card. Her plan was simple. Make herself the victim, make me the villain, and walk out with a payday. Forget the prenup we both signed. Forget logic. She was betting that the judge would see a vulnerable woman abandoned by a heartless man and use emotion to rewrite the law. But Jessica had made a mistake. She thought I'd panic. She thought I'd cave under the pressure of public sympathy. What she didn't know was that I'd already figured her out months ago. See, manipulation has a rhythm. Once you've heard the song enough times, you can predict the notes. And by now, I knew Jessica's melody by heart. I watched as she took her seat, one hand on her stomach, the other smoothing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her lips quivered ever so slightly, just enough to look like she'd been crying. She let out a faint sigh, glancing toward the judge's empty seat like she was silently begging for mercy. It was good theatre. I'll give her that. But what she didn't realize, what she could never comprehend, was that truth doesn't flinch. It doesn't need to perform. Somewhere between pity and disgust, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. I was just done playing her game, done letting her twist the story, done pretending this was anything but what it was, a performance for money. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge entered. An older man, the kind whose every sigh carried decades of disappointment. As he took his seat, Jessica straightened up, her hands still on her belly like a shield. It struck me then, how far people will go to protect a lie. How much energy it takes to sustain something built on deception. In that moment, I saw it clearly. She wasn't just here to win. She was here to survive. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. Because for people like Jessica, truth isn't freedom. It's the enemy. As the judge cleared his throat and the first words of the hearing echoed through the room, I leaned back in my chair, steady, unmoved. Jessica thought she had the perfect plan. But plans only work when you control the story. And in this courtroom, for once, she didn't. Not anymore. Before that morning in court, the months leading up to it had already been a war zone. A slow, grinding conflict where love had long died, but pride refused to be buried. Divorce doesn't just split assets, it splits versions of reality. And in ours, Jessica had rewritten every chapter. When I look back, I can't say I was surprised by how far she went. The signs had been there long before the lawyers got involved. The silent treatments that lasted weeks. The sudden tears when I tried to talk about money. The mysterious absences disguised as girls' weekends. Somewhere along the way, Marriage stopped being a partnership and became a performance. And Jessica was the star actress. Our divorce process was a reflection of that same theatre, delays, tantrums. Every court date became a new episode. One week she'd claim she was too sick to attend. The next, she'd file some irrelevant paperwork just to buy more time. It wasn't incompetence, it was strategy, a form of emotional attrition. There's a saying among divorce lawyers: the one who controls the timeline controls the leverage. Jessica must have heard that somewhere, because she weaponized time. While she delayed, I watched everything else stall. My job performance, my friendships, even my sleep. It's incredible how much chaos one determined person can create with just a signature and a grudge. Sometimes I'd wonder, if she had poured half that energy into the marriage instead of the war, would we have made it? Maybe, maybe not. But I'll never know, because Jessica didn't want resolution. She wanted dominance. And then, somewhere in the middle of this storm, she disappeared for a week. Her lawyer said she was unwell. I didn't buy it. I'd seen this before. When confronted, Jessica would vanish, regroup, recalibrate, and come back with a new weapon. When she finally resurfaced, she looked radiant, happier. That was the first red flag. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. There's a particular glow that doesn't come from peace. It comes from secret plans. It was only weeks later that I learned the truth. She was pregnant. I remember sitting in my kitchen that night, staring at the message from my lawyer. Pregnant. The word just sat there on the screen, heavy and absurd. For a split second, my heart stopped, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. Then I laughed, a long, bitter laugh that filled the empty room, because I knew what it meant. This wasn't about motherhood. This was about strategy. In the world of family court, pregnancy changes everything. It changes tone. It changes sympathy. It changes how judges and mediators feel about a case. Statistics show that in over 70% of contested divorces, visible pregnancy influences financial rulings, often subconsciously. It's not law, it's psychology. And Jessica? She was nothing if not a quick study in human behavior. But even with all her scheming, there was one thing she didn't count on: me having already stopped caring. Not in the way she thought, though. It wasn't apathy, it was clarity. When you've been through enough deceit, you start to see patterns not as surprises, but as inevitabilities. That's what I had. Clarity. I knew she wasn't carrying my child. I also knew she would use it against me. The question wasn't if, it was how. When I told my mother about the pregnancy, she sounded tired. Not angry, not shocked, just tired. Maybe you should just settle, she said softly over the phone. End it before it gets uglier. I remember pinching the bridge of my nose, the way I used to do when I was a kid trying to stay calm. Mum, I said quietly, she's not getting a cent. She's pregnant, she whispered. Like that was supposed to be a trump card. I almost laughed again. Not with my kid. There was silence on the other end. The kind of silence that stretches between disbelief and disappointment. Are you sure? I wanted to scream. Was I sure? Jessica had cheated. Not once, multiple times. I had proof. I had photos, but it wasn't about proof anymore. It was about perception. To my mother, and maybe to the world, I'd still be the man walking away from a pregnant woman. Mom, I finally said, if that child were mine, I'd take care of them. She wouldn't even have to ask. But that's the difference between me and her, she schemes. I take responsibility. I heard her sigh, the weight of 1,000 unspoken worries in that breath. I just don't want to see this get uglier. I stared out the window at the city lights. It already is. And I meant it. Because once a relationship reaches the point where truth no longer matters, only appearances do, you're not just fighting your ex. You're fighting the story they're telling about you. By the time the court date was finally set, I was ready. Not angry, not vengeful, just ready to end it. I didn't know what she would pull, but I knew Jessica. She never entered a room without a script. And when she finally walked into that courtroom with her stomach showing, chin tilted just slightly upward, I realized this was her finale, her masterpiece. What she didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that this time the ending wasn't hers to write. When Jessica walked into that courtroom, she wasn't just pregnant, she was performing pregnancy. Every step, every gesture, every carefully chosen pause told a story. a trembling hand resting protectively over her belly, a faint sigh as she sat, as though the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. She had transformed her body into a stage prop, her unborn child into a prop for sympathy, and to her credit, she played the role well. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but the murmurs had already started, the quiet whispers, the sideways glances. A few women in the back row frowned in my direction. To them, it must have looked simple. A cold, composed man in a pressed suit and a fragile woman carrying life. Who needs context when the image tells the story? That's how public opinion works. Silent, unrecorded, but powerful. There's something ancient about how we respond to motherhood. Evolution wired us that way, to protect the pregnant, to shield them. It's instinctive compassion. But Jessica knew how to twist compassion into currency. When she looked up at me across the courtroom, there was no fear in her eyes, only calculation. Her gaze said everything. You won't dare fight me now, but she didn't know me anymore. She hadn't for a long time. You could say that marriage had been our training ground for this moment. Years of gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional blackmail had prepared me to stay calm when everything looked chaotic. I'd spent nights awake replaying conversations, questioning my sanity, wondering how someone could lie so smoothly that even the truth started to sound suspicious. Now, as I watched her smooth her dress and dab the corner of her eye with a tissue, I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity. Just a strange detachment, like I was watching a rerun of a show I'd already seen too many times. She wanted to win this case with tears. I planned to win it with facts. That's where Ethan came in. Ethan wasn't just a lawyer, he was a scalpel in human form. The kind of man who smiled politely while cutting through your argument with surgical precision. Calm, composed, never raising his voice. His eyes said, I already know where this ends. He'd been my shield throughout the entire process. While Jessica flooded the court with emotional pleas, Ethan countered with evidence. Where she told stories, he brought documents. He once told me, in family court, truth doesn't always win, but consistency does. So we were consistent. Every claim she made, answered. Every accusation, documented. Every timeline, checked. I didn't need to out-dramatize her. I just needed to let her overplay her hand. And she did. The thing about habitual liars is that they can't stop lying. Even when silence would save them, they keep talking, adding more detail, more drama, until they trip over their own story. Jessica had no idea she was walking straight into a trap. One she'd built for herself. When the judge finally entered, the room fell into the quiet hum of protocol. Everyone rose. Jessica exhaled shakily, playing her part to the end. She was already in character, the abandoned mother-to-be. Her lawyer, a nervous young man who looked barely out of law school, shuffled papers with trembling fingers. I almost pitied him. Almost. He had no idea what kind of storm he was standing beside. The proceedings began. The bailiff read the case number. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked over the documents. And then, as expected, Jessica's lawyer stood up, clearing his throat dramatically. Your Honor, he began, his voice solemn, my client has been left in an impossible situation. She is pregnant, unemployed, and struggling to rebuild her life after an emotionally taxing separation. The petitioner's prolonged delays and unwillingness to reach an amicable settlement have only worsened her hardship. He paused, glancing at Jessica. Right on cue, she sniffled, eyes glistening. It was almost perfect, her lawyer continued. Given her current condition, we are requesting financial support and temporary relief. Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened. Calm. Still. Like a predator waiting for the moment his prey stopped running. The judge nodded slowly, making notes. Jessica's performance had landed. Sympathy was in the air, thick, palpable, dangerous. That's when Ethan stood. His movement was slow, deliberate. A man not seeking to defend himself, but to dismantle a lie brick by brick, Your Honor. He began with a courteous nod. While we sympathize deeply with Ms. Parker's current situation, there are crucial facts that must be clarified before proceeding. His tone was polite, almost gentle, but I knew that voice. It was the calm before the thunder. He flipped a page, looked directly at Jessica's lawyer, and asked the question that would change everything. First and foremost, can you please confirm for the record, who is the father of this child? The room froze. Jessica's head jerked slightly, as if the words had been a slap. Her lawyer blinked, thrown off rhythm. The judge looked up over his glasses. Silence filled the room like a vacuum. It was a single question, but it hit like a verdict. Because in that moment, everyone understood. The sympathy, the tears, the entire performance. None of it mattered unless that child was mine. Jessica's entire plan depended on one assumption, that no one would dare ask the question. She was wrong. The silence that followed Ethan's question was the kind of silence that swallows sound. You could hear the faint ticking of the courtroom clock, the nervous shifting of papers, even the shallow breaths of people realizing that this single question, had just torn a hole in the story Jessica had so carefully built. Who is the father of this child? Ethan repeated, his voice still calm but edged now with precision. Jessica didn't answer. For a heartbeat, she just sat there, her lips parted, her eyes darting between her lawyer and the judge. It was like watching a tightrope walker realize, mid-step, that the rope beneath her wasn't anchored. Her lawyer blinked rapidly, his Adam's apple bobbing as he tried to recover. My client believes it is the petitioners, he said finally, the word believes landing like a dull thud in the air. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his polite smile unmoving. Believes, he echoed, letting the word linger. So there is no proof? The young lawyer hesitated. Well, not yet, but given their history, Ethan cut him off gently. Respectfully, Your Honor, history is not evidence. It was surgical, clean, not loud, not emotional, just devastatingly effective. I sat there, watching Jessica's face flicker through emotions like a film reel running too fast. Shock, denial, indignation, and finally, the faint trace of fear. She hadn't expected this. Her whole plan had relied on the assumption that the pregnancy itself would be enough to sway sympathy, that no one would dare peel back the curtain. The judge leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Ms. Parker, he said slowly, have you undergone a paternity test? Jessica's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her eyes darted toward her lawyer again, searching for rescue, but none came. I just assumed. You assumed, the judge repeated, unimpressed. Assumption is not evidence, Ms. Parker. We deal in facts here, not feelings. That line hit the courtroom like a cold wind. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because beneath the arrogance and the deception, I caught something real in her eyes. Panic. The kind of panic that comes when the world you've built on half-truths starts to crumble faster than you can patch it. She had spent so long mastering emotional manipulation that she'd forgotten the law doesn't bend to feelings, at least not always. Jessica's lawyer stammered something about pending documentation, but the judge wasn't buying it. Pending, he muttered, flipping through the file in front of him. Ms. Parker, is there any evidence before this court that the petitioner is the father of your child? The silence was unbearable. You could feel the tension pulse through the air, thick enough to taste. When she didn't answer, Ethan moved again, unhurried, methodical. Your Honor, he said, since the question has been raised, we'd like to submit additional materials into the record. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. I knew what was inside. We'd prepared it weeks ago, not because we wanted to use it, but because we knew we might have to. Ethan didn't believe in luck. He believed in documentation. As he handed the papers to the clerk, I glanced at Jessica. She was rigid in her seat, her eyes wide. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel it, the slow turning of the tide. The judge took a moment to skim the documents. His expression changed almost immediately, from curiosity to disbelief, and then to quiet anger. Ethan didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. He let the evidence do the talking. Finally, the judge looked up. Ms. Parker, he said, his voice heavy. These are photographs taken approximately 2 months after your separation, are they not? Jessica froze. I could almost see the breath leave her body. They appear to show you on vacation in Florida with another man. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Even her lawyer went pale. Ethan spoke at last, his tone precise. Your Honor, we are not here to pass moral judgment, but we do believe this evidence, combined with Ms. Parker's own medical records, establishes that her pregnancy began after the date of marital separation. The judge's eyebrows lifted. You have medical documentation as well? Yes, Your Honor. Ethan produced another sheet. Records subpoenaed directly from Ms. Parker's physician's office indicate that her first positive pregnancy test occurred more than 3 months after the parties ceased cohabitation. You could almost hear the sound of Jessica's plan collapsing, whispered something to her lawyer, her voice cracking. He didn't respond. He just stared down at his notes, defeated. This was the moment Ethan had been waiting for. Calm, clinical, no theatrics. He looked at the judge and said softly, "In light of this evidence, we respectfully move to dismiss Ms. Parker's financial claims in their entirety." The judge didn't respond right away. He just exhaled, long and weary, like a man who'd seen this kind of deceit too many times before. Then he nodded. "Proceed," he said quietly. "We'll address the evidence formally." Jessica sat motionless, her hand trembling on the table. The mask was cracking. You could see it in her eyes. Realization dawning that her story wasn't just unraveling, it was about to turn against her. "I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. I just sat there, steady, as I'd promised myself I would, because this wasn't victory. It was vindication, and vindication isn't sweet, it's silent." When Ethan asked that question, "Who is the father of this child?" the courtroom changed. It was as if someone had pulled the oxygen from the air. Time didn't stop, but it slowed. You could almost hear the echo of every lie Jessica had ever told, folding in on itself, collapsing like a house of cards. The judge's pen froze mid-note. The clerk's hand hovered over the keyboard, uncertain whether to type. Even the bailiff, who had probably seen 1,000 family disputes in his life, glanced up from his post. All eyes were on Jessica. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She blinked once, twice, and then tried to form a word. I don't." "You don't?" Ethan asked gently, not as a challenge, but as an invitation for her to continue. Jessica's lawyer, poor man, tried to rescue her. "Your Honor, my client believes—" "Belief," Ethan interrupted smoothly, "is not evidence." The judge nodded slowly. "Quite right." Jessica's hands began to tremble. Her perfectly manicured fingers clenched together on the table, knuckles whitening. For the first time since the hearing began, her performance faltered. The tremble wasn't part of the act. It was real. The silence stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. Then Ethan took a slow step forward, his voice calm but deliberate. "Your Honor, my client is not seeking to humiliate Ms. Parker, but the court must recognize that any financial claims tied to pregnancy require clear establishment of paternity. And in this case," he glanced at the judge, then back at Jessica, "the timeline simply doesn't support her claim." Jessica's lawyer stiffened. "That's a serious allegation." Ethan didn't even look at him. "No, counsel. It's a fact." He nodded to the clerk, who handed the judge another folder. Inside were photographs, clear, undeniable, time-stamped. Jessica on a beach, another man's arm wrapped around her waist. The two of them kissing under a blazing Florida sunset. You could feel the collective intake of breath in the courtroom. The judge's eyebrows lifted slightly, though his expression remained professional. He didn't need to say anything. The evidence spoke for itself. "Ms. Parker," he said finally, "these photographs were taken 2 months after your separation from the petitioner. Is that correct?" Jessica's voice cracked. I don't remember. You don't remember being in Florida? I mean, I was going through a lot." The judge's tone hardened. "That may be true, but you were clearly not going through it alone." Her lawyer swallowed, visibly sweating now. "Your Honor, this line of questioning is—" The judge cut him off. "It is necessary." He turned back to Jessica. "Have you provided this court with any evidence, medical or otherwise, that indicates the petitioner is the father?" Jessica's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I just assumed—" The word assumed hung in the air like a confession. Ethan didn't need to say anything. The judge already looked disappointed. Disappointed not just in her, but in the insult to the institution itself. "Ms. Parker," the judge said sternly, "you do understand that false statements to this court have consequences." Jessica nodded weakly, tears threatening to spill. But even her tears looked out of place now, like props from a play that had already ended. Ethan cleared his throat softly. "Your Honor, if I may continue." The judge gestured for him to proceed. Ethan opened the second folder. "These are subpoenaed medical records from Ms. Parker's attending physician," he said evenly. "They indicate her first confirmed pregnancy test occurred more than 3 months after the date she and my client last resided together." Jessica's head dropped. Her lawyer froze. The judge took the papers, his jaw tightening as he read. "I see," he said quietly. In that moment, you could feel the courtroom tilt, every ounce of sympathy draining away, replaced by something colder. Not anger, not outrage, just the hollow realization that a performance had ended and truth had walked in. Ethan stepped back, hands clasped behind his back, his work done. The judge exhaled slowly, setting the papers down. "Ms. Parker," he began, his tone no longer soft. "This court is not in the business of rewarding deception. Based on the evidence before me, there is no basis for financial support or deviation from the existing prenuptial agreement." Jessica's head snapped up. "What?" "The prenup stands," the judge said firmly. "You will not be receiving alimony or additional compensation." The words hit her like a physical blow. "No." "Your Honor, please," she started, her voice rising, desperation cracking through the polished exterior. "You don't understand. I'm pregnant and he's walking away. He's—" "Enough," the judge said sharply, rubbing his temples. "This court does not make financial judgments based on emotional appeals. Your pregnancy has no legal bearing on this divorce unless paternity is established, which, based on the evidence, it has not been." Jessica's breathing quickened. "You're letting him walk away?" The judge's eyes flashed. "Miss Parker, I am enforcing the law. That is all." Her lawyer sank into his chair, face pale. Ethan said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence did the work. Across the courtroom, I sat perfectly still, watching the realization dawn in her eyes. The realization that her last weapon had turned on her. It wasn't just the judge's verdict that broke her. It was the truth catching up. Years of deceit had led to this moment, and now, in the one place where facts could not be manipulated, her entire story had crumbled in less than 5 minutes. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. Just the quiet certainty that justice, though slow, eventually arrives. When the gavel came down, it sounded final, not just for the case, but for every illusion Jessica had ever tried to build. And that was the day she stopped being a threat. That was the day she started being a cautionary tale. When the gavel struck wood, the sound was final, sharp, echoing, absolute. Jessica flinched at the sound. The same woman who had once mastered entire rooms with her tears now sat motionless, her face drained of color. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't hear him. Or maybe she didn't want to. Ethan gathered his papers with quiet precision, every movement controlled. No gloating, no smile, no satisfaction, just composure, the kind of calm that came from truth doing the work for him. The bailiff called the next case, and people began to move. Chairs scraped, documents shuffled, voices rose in low murmurs. But Jessica stayed frozen. She looked small, not fragile, but diminished, like the performance lights had gone out, and she suddenly realized the stage was empty. When we stepped out into the hallway, the noise of the courthouse seemed distant, muted. I could still feel the weight of what had just happened, the collision of facts and fiction, and the quiet destruction that followed. Ethan stopped near the door and turned to me. "You all right?" I nodded, though my voice didn't come immediately. I thought I'd feel relieved. "And?" I exhaled. "It just feels quiet." He gave a small, knowing smile. "That's what truth sounds like when it finally settles." We started walking down the hall, our footsteps soft against the marble floor. Behind us, I could hear Jessica's voice, muffled but frantic, echoing faintly from the courtroom, pleading with her lawyer, arguing, trying to salvage something from the wreckage. "She'll appeal," I murmured. "Probably," Ethan said, adjusting his tie. "But it won't matter. The foundation's gone." He said it so simply, as if it were just another line item in a case file. But he wasn't being cruel, just factual. That's how he was. Methodical, unshakable, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. We reached the courthouse steps. The sunlight outside felt sharper, the air colder. I paused halfway down, glancing back at the tall stone building that had just witnessed the end of a story that had started years before, with charm, with promises, with lies dressed as love. Jessica had built her world on manipulation. She believed she could twist emotion into evidence, sympathy into strategy. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't need to shout. It waits, patiently. And when it finally arrives, it takes everything false with it. Ethan stopped beside me. "You don't need to look back," he said quietly. "I know, but I did anyway, for one last time." Through the courthouse doors, I could just make out Jessica emerging, sunglasses on, jaw tight. The mask was back, but it didn't fit anymore. Her lawyer trailed behind her, avoiding her gaze. She looked around, scanning the crowd like she was still trying to find an audience. There wasn't one. She caught sight of us briefly, her eyes narrowing, lips parting, as if she might say something. But she didn't. She just stood there, watching as we walked away. For a long time, she had lived in control, pulling strings, orchestrating outcomes, mastering the art of emotional leverage. But now, for the first time, she was on the outside of her own story. And I realized something then. The worst punishment for someone like Jessica isn't losing the case. It's losing the narrative. Because people like her don't crave justice or truth. They crave power. And without it, they become hollow. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, Ethan turned to me again. "It's over," he said. I nodded slowly. "Not for her." "No," he agreed. "For her, it's just beginning." He walked ahead and I followed, feeling the sunlight wash over us. The world outside felt clearer somehow, sharper but lighter. Behind us, the courthouse doors closed with a heavy thud, and somewhere inside, a woman who once thought she could rewrite reality sat alone, realizing that for the first time in years, no one believed her anymore. In the weeks after the hearing, life took on a strange calm, the kind that feels too still, like the air before a storm. I went back to work, went to the gym, even started sleeping again. Real sleep, not the restless kind where you wake up thinking you heard your phone buzz. For the first time in years, my life wasn't being dictated by Jessica's chaos, but I knew it wouldn't last, because people like Jessica don't just lose, they linger. It started small, a blocked number calling late at night, silent voicemails that lasted exactly 10 seconds. Then, a text from an unknown contact. "I hope you're happy." I stared at it for a long time. No name, but it didn't need one. The tone was unmistakable, half accusation, half self-pity. I typed back, "I am. Thanks for asking." Then I hit block. That should have been the end of it. But endings, I've learned, are rarely clean. A few days later, Ethan called. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "The courts opened an inquiry into Jessica's testimony." "Perjury?" I asked. "Potentially. Fraud too. The judge didn't like being lied to, especially not so blatantly." He sounded almost impressed. And honestly, so was I. The judicial system wasn't known for poetic justice, but sometimes, just sometimes, it got things right. Apparently, Jessica's stunt had done more than cost her the case. It had embarrassed the court. Her financial disclosures didn't line up, and the fake narrative about her pregnancy was officially under review. A month later, I heard she'd been fined for wasting the court's time. Her lawyer had dropped her, citing irreconcilable ethical concerns. That's legal speak for "she lied to me too." But what really hit her wasn't the law, it was the fallout. Word spreads fast in small circles, and Jessica had always moved in social spaces where reputation was currency. Suddenly, people she once charmed started keeping their distance. The invitations stopped. The smiles faded. Even her friends, those who had believed every sob story she spun, started whispering. The truth has a way of creeping through the cracks, even in the prettiest lies. Then came the real twist. I got a message from one of Ethan's paralegals, a court document that had crossed her desk by coincidence. Jessica had applied for government aid, claiming single motherhood and financial distress. But her application had been flagged. Why? Because they asked for proof of paternity, and she didn't have any. In the eyes of the system, she wasn't a victim anymore. She was a question mark. And just when I thought her spiral had reached the bottom, word got out about the photos Ethan had presented in court. The ones showing her on vacation with another man. Her new boyfriend, apparently. Well, former boyfriend. Because after that evidence surfaced, the guy started doing the math. Realized the timing didn't add up. That maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the father either. He left her. Just disappeared. No dramatic breakup, no shouting match. He just ghosted her. The same way she used to ghost responsibility. From what I heard later, that was the moment it all truly collapsed. Jessica had always believed she could control people's perception of her, that with enough charm, enough tears, enough tragedy, she could stay on top. But this time, every door she knocked on led to silence. Every person she turned to had seen the headlines, the whispers, the court documents. Her greatest fear had become reality. No one was listening anymore. I won't pretend I didn't feel a flicker of satisfaction. I did. Seeing justice land for once, it's a rare thing. But there was something else underneath it too. Pity. Because I remembered the woman she used to be, or maybe the woman I thought she was, the way she'd smile when she wanted something, the way she could make the world bend around her with a single look. That kind of manipulation doesn't come from confidence. It comes from fear, from emptiness, and when the lies fall away, what's left is just silence. I told Ethan once over coffee. It's strange. I don't hate her anymore. He raised an eyebrow. You should. She tried to destroy you. I shrugged. She already destroyed herself. He considered that, then nodded slowly. That's the cruelest kind of justice. He wasn't wrong. There's a saying in behavioral psychology. People don't change when they see the light. They change when they feel the heat. Jessica had finally felt the heat, and it burned everything she'd built. The next time I saw her, months later, by pure accident, it wasn't in a courtroom. It was in a grocery store parking lot. She didn't see me at first. She was standing beside an old sedan, fumbling with her keys. No makeup, no performance, just tired. When she finally looked up and our eyes met, there was no anger, no drama, just a flash of recognition. Then she looked away, and for the first time, I realized she didn't scare me anymore, because the woman who had once controlled my life was now just a person, a deeply flawed, deeply lost person, and I was free. There's a moment, after years of chaos, when peace doesn't feel peaceful, it feels foreign. For months after the trial, I kept waiting for something to go wrong. A new legal notice, a smear campaign, some new manipulation from Jessica's playbook. But none of it came, just quiet. The kind of quiet that made you realize how loud your life used to be. I'd wake up and for the first few seconds, still expect that familiar anxiety, that knot in my chest that used to come with every text notification. But it wasn't there anymore. The air felt cleaner. My apartment lighter. Freedom, I realized, isn't just about being unchained from someone. It's about remembering what it feels like to live without performing for their expectations. One Sunday morning, I found myself at a cafe I hadn't visited in years, the same place Jessica and I used to go when things were still good, or at least pretending to be. The owner, an older woman named Rosa, recognized me immediately. It's been a long time, she said, smiling as she poured my coffee. Yeah, I replied. Feels like another lifetime. She tilted her head. You look lighter now, I laughed softly. That's one way to put it. Rosa had seen hundreds of couples come and go, arguments whispered over pastries, breakups masked by polite smiles. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. She just slid the cup toward me and said, "Closure tastes better with coffee." It did. Sitting there, watching sunlight spill across the street, I finally let myself think about what had happened. Not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as someone who had learned. There's a truth people don't like to admit. Sometimes, the person who destroys you also teaches you the most. Jessica had taught me how dangerous love could be when it's rooted in control, how empathy can become a weapon when it's used by the wrong hands, and how silence, real silence, is the most powerful answer to manipulation. But above all, she taught me something I hadn't expected, that peace is a skill. You have to learn it, practice it, protect it. I didn't realize it at the time, but her downfall wasn't the end of a battle. It was the beginning of rebuilding a life I had neglected for years. I reconnected with old friends, spent time with family who no longer had to tiptoe around my volatile marriage. My mother, once torn between her sympathy for Jessica and her loyalty to me, finally looked at me with relief instead of worry. One evening, over dinner, she said quietly, "You handled it better than I thought you would." I smiled. "I didn't, I just had help." "Ethan." "Yeah, in time," she nodded. "Well, maybe now you can start living again." That word, living, hit harder than I expected, because for so long I hadn't been living. I'd been surviving inside someone else's story, and now finally, that story was over. But Jessica's wasn't. I heard bits and pieces over the next few months. The fraud inquiry had escalated. Her reputation had tanked. She'd lost her apartment and moved in with a friend out of town. The pregnancy, real but not mine, had become another storm in her unraveling life. People who once pitied her now avoided her name, not out of cruelty but out of fatigue. You can only cry wolf so many times before even your tears sound rehearsed. And then, one afternoon, I got one last text. Not angry, not manipulative, just a single sentence. I never meant for it to end like this. I read it twice, then deleted it, because intentions, no matter how softly spoken, don't erase consequences. In the quiet that followed, I thought about the years I'd spent trying to fix something broken beyond repair, about the time, the money, the emotion wasted on someone who saw empathy as opportunity. And I wondered how many others out there were still trapped in that cycle, thinking love meant sacrifice, that forgiveness meant weakness. The truth is, sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. So, if there's any lesson buried in this mess, it's this. People will show you who they are when they think you can't walk away. Believe them. Because the moment you stop playing their game, their power dissolves. A few weeks later, I passed the courthouse again. Different case, different faces. But it stopped me in my tracks. The same marble steps, the same heavy doors. I stood there for a while, remembering everything that had happened inside. And then I realized something. That building wasn't a monument to pain anymore. It was a reminder that no matter how deep you sink, truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. It doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be patient. As I turned to leave, the autumn air brushed against my face. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel cold. It felt clean. I walked away without looking back, because some graves once dug don't need flowers. Months turned into a year. Seasons shifted quietly, as they always do when life no longer runs on chaos. I had learned to measure time not by court dates or confrontation, but by small, human things. Morning walks, Sunday dinners, laughter that wasn't strained. Freedom didn't come with fireworks, it came with stillness. But sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself thinking about Jessica, not with anger anymore and not even curiosity, just reflection. Because in every tragedy, there's a truth hiding somewhere beneath the rubble. Her story, for all its deception, wasn't born from nothing. People like Jessica don't wake up one day and decide to destroy. They evolve into it. They learn early that vulnerability is dangerous, that manipulation is safer. Maybe it started long before me, with someone else's betrayal, someone else's lie. Maybe she learned to survive by controlling the story. But survival built on deceit always turns into self-destruction. I once read a psychology study that said manipulation thrives on 3 things: insecurity, attention, and control. Take any of those away and the person starts to unravel. That's exactly what happened to her. When the courtroom stripped away her sympathy, when her lies stopped working, when no one came running to save her, she lost the only tools she'd ever had. And maybe that's why, in a strange, quiet way, I pitied her, because losing everything she built meant losing herself. There's a documentary truth in all of this, one that isn't just about divorce or deceit, but about human fragility. The line between love and control is razor thin, and when one person mistakes manipulation for affection, the result isn't just heartbreak, it's collapse. Ethan once told me, courtrooms don't deal in emotion. They deal in evidence, but life does both. It tests your heart and your logic at the same time. And if you're not careful, one can blind the other. For years, I let emotion blind me. I wanted to believe in Jessica's better side, even when I saw the worst of it, because it's easier to cling to the illusion of love than to face the emptiness it hides. Now, I understand what that emptiness really was. A void she tried to fill with drama, lies, attention, anything but truth. And I had been one of those things she used to fill it, but no more. The best thing about truth is that once it's out, it can't be buried again. It lingers, reshapes, heals. In the end, Jessica's downfall wasn't a courtroom verdict. It was inevitability. The system just sped it up. I sometimes wonder where she is now. Maybe she's changed. Maybe she hasn't. Maybe she's still telling stories, rewriting the past to make herself the victim instead of the architect. But it's not my story anymore. And that's the real ending. Not revenge, not punishment, but detachment. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you don't need to win because you already stopped playing. People often say, time heals. I don't think it does, not by itself. What heals is truth, acceptance, the quiet decision to stop reopening old wounds. If there's one message I'd leave behind, one lesson in the ruins of all this, it's simple. Don't let someone convince you that chaos is love. Love doesn't suffocate. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't need an audience or a courtroom to prove its worth. Love, real love, stands on truth. And truth doesn't need drama to exist. Looking back, I realized Jessica wasn't my greatest mistake. She was my greatest teacher, not because she loved me well, but because she showed me what happens when love becomes currency, when feelings turn into leverage. Her story ended in scandal, mine began in silence. And if you ask me which one I'd choose every time, silence wins. The documentary of it all closes not with judgment, but understanding. That sometimes the people who break you also free you. That endings aren't always tragedies, they're the universe's way of clearing space for something honest to grow. And that truth, no matter how painful, will always outlast the lie, fade out,